Hello. If you're a landlord or tenant and you want to know whether or not attorney's fees can be collected in an eviction case, then stay tuned because today's your lucky day. I'm Benjamin Sanchez, and I'm an attorney in Houston, Texas. This is another edition of Legal Grounds Live. Let's get into the topic of attorney's fees in eviction cases. Now, in residential evictions, well, first of all, it's important to note that there are really two types of evictions. We have the residential evictions and we have commercial evictions. The Texas Property Code primarily talks about and governs residential residential evictions. So that means that the commercial evictions are far and few between. Why is that? Because the Texas Property Code doesn't govern that. And what happens in commercial leases is that most of the time there are no evictions because there's just other remedies pursuant to the contract, pursuant to the lease. That would include a lockout. So a lot of times in commercial cases, you have lockouts instead of evictions because the property code doesn't require an eviction in a commercial setting. However, if there is a commercial eviction, then usually the terms of the lease will decide who gets the attorney's fees. So it's very important when you're a commercial tenant to look at that lease because that lease is going to govern default. It's going to govern, sort of remedies for default and the rights of the landlord and the tenant during default. So I'm really going to be talking about residential evictions today because that's what the Texas Property Code primarily governs. Now, there are some leases that will allow for the collection of attorney's fees in the lease, regardless of the time of the notice to vacate or anything else I'm about to talk about. Again, normally these are set out in the lease. However, if the terms regarding attorney's fees are not set forth in the lease, then we have to look to the Texas Property Code. And here's what the Texas Property Code says about attorney's fees for residential evictions. First of all, when you are given a 3-day notice to vacate, you cannot, there are no attorney's fees. Let me say that to the landlords and to the tenants. In a 3-day notice to vacate situation, there are no attorney's fees. Instead, what the Texas Property Code says is that you have to have a 10-day notice to vacate. And in that notice, you have to inform the tenant not only about the 10 days to vacate, but you have to inform the tenant about the attorney's fees and the right that you'll have to collect those. So the tenant has to be given additional time, plus the tenant has to be made aware that you'll be seeking attorney's fees if you have to file an eviction case. And that's really the big thing. Now, there are other evictions, sort of post foreclosure, post sale of the home or the unit where you live. Those you usually have 30-day notices. But again, even on the 30-day notice, there would need to be some sort of actual writing in the notice to vacate that you intend to seek attorney's fees. Even in the 3-day notice to vacate, if someone says, I'm going to seek attorney's fees in the eviction if I have to file suit, but that landlord only gives you 3 days to move out and gives you a 3-day notice to vacate, the fact that the landlord put that language in there doesn't mean anything. No landlord can get a attorney's fees pursuant to the Texas Property Code for a 3-day notice to vacate. They may be able to get that under the lease because the lease sets forth some provisions. But if there's no provision in the lease that discusses attorney's fees, then the Texas Property Code applies. Again, there's no attorney's fees for a 3-day notice to vacate, but there is if someone gives you a 10-day notice to vacate and puts that language in there. Even on the 30-day notice to vacate, there has to be language in the 30-day notice regarding the attorney's fees. I hope this has been helpful. I try to do these simple and quick videos on very particular topics for consumer people so that you understand your rights and remedies and what you have and don't have when it comes to Texas law. So this has been another edition of Legal Grounds Live. Benjamin Sanchez, Houston, Texas. I hope you all have a great weekend. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.